What is going on with football recruiting? It is a dry period, and why the transfer portal might not be the fix people tend to think it is.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Ryan Herring's the Locked On Badgers. Thank you for making this one of your first listens every day. Really appreciate it. We're going to get right into it. But first, I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster and better. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. We're going to get right into it. We got Justin Julka on the show. Been a long time. I've been on vacation. Great to have you back, Justin. I think I'm going to start doing a segment. We're going to try it out today. It's going to be like Justin's Corner, how Justin sees it, or Justin's thoughts. So we're going to start doing that. We're going to talk recruiting, transfer portal, Paul Chryst. I want to start here with the recruiting class. I teased it at the opening. It is, if I can just run it down right now, currently by the 247 composite, 46th overall, 13th in the Big Ten. And a lot of fans, if you follow recruiting, a lot of people on the show will be quick to point out 247 gives classes a bump with more commits, right? So they're 13th overall. But even if you just look at the average rating per recruit, Wisconsin's 8th in the Big Ten. No matter what I'm saying is there's no way really to slice this. There's no angle, there's no lens to look at this and say this is really looking like a strong class. The only teams in the Big Ten Wisconsin is ahead of: Illinois, Maryland, Rutgers, Minnesota, and Purdue. That's not good. So that's where I want to start with. Where are you at on this current recruiting class? Where do you see it going? Hopeful, pessimistic, etc. I'm going to kick it to you.
Listen, I'm going to say this. I think the class will have more good players come out of it than we actually expect. However, that being said, I do think this is going to be a down year from a recruiting standpoint. I personally do think we will end up getting Tackett Curtis. I actually think that there are some hints there that are kind of pointed in our direction. And I do think that we offer him the best chance at maximizing his potential. I don't think he's a guy who wants to play middle linebacker in college. I think he'd rather get the chance to play on the edge here and probably be allowed to roam a little bit more.
Right.
But that said, he's not a guy who's going to really skyrocket our recruiting average. And that is a huge deal to me. We were trending very positively from a per recruit basis, the prior couple classes here, and we're just not now. I think we're mid 86 right now, maybe a little under that.
Right around 86, which is not that good.
I'm going to guess is probably the worst we've had under Chryst. Am I wrong on that?
I would have to go back and look. I know it's the worst in a while.
Yeah.
Because he had that great run of 2019, 2020, 2021.
We've mostly been at least 87 for our classes. So it is a step in the wrong direction. Now, here's the issue that I see. The big issue that I see, we don't have a lot left sitting out there on the board.
That's the problem.
And we have probably 10 spots left. So we have nothing at quarterback. And I don't want to dog on that, but whether we're trying to flip somebody or not, you have to earn a flip. So if somebody's already committed somewhere else, that means you're fighting against a team that he already liked enough to commit to. So there's no guarantee there unless you're going to go to a team that is potentially like a MAC team or something like that, where we're an obvious step up in terms of what he's going to. And there's no guarantee that player is going to be anything special. I don't want to dog on a kid because I think you start to get above an 83 for quarterbacks and you're it's a roll of the dice.
As we've seen. 3-star range for quarterbacks is a total crapshoot.
It is.
For the most part.
You have no idea what you're looking at there. You could have a guy who's an 84 that ends up being, an NFL quarterback. You just don't know. That said, Wisconsin has locked down a lot of the positions that you'd like them to, and the positions where they actually need to make some ground, they're not necessarily doing great. It's sounding like Khalil Tate is probably going to go to Iowa tomorrow.
Yeah, let's set that one up quick. So for those who may not have heard, Khalil Tate is announcing his commitment Tuesday, 10 a.m. Whenever I'm not sure when people are going to hear this show. They're probably going to hear it around that same time, if not later. So that's a big time plan A target at safety that we've talked on this show several times. You and I have talked about him. I talked about him with John Garcia. I love his film. All the crystal balls, which is basically the recruiting prognosticators, the professionals, are all pointing to Iowa. And none of that's behind a paywall. Everyone, if you want to look at where that stuff is, guys, go to 247. You can look at where people are projecting them to go. I'll never bring paywall stuff onto the show. But when Justin says everything's kind of pointing to Iowa, everybody's essentially his 7 predictions, crystal balls is what they're called, every single one of them to Iowa. He's going to Iowa. Yeah. And that stings.
Somebody knows something at that point, and it's the cat's out of the bag.
That really stings because he was a guy I thought they needed in this class.
Oh, they do. And I like some of the young talent we have at safety, but here's the issue that people don't understand. Guys that come in that are well thought of recruits are not guaranteed to hit. So you need to have as much in that stable as you can. And when you downgrade to, say, a low 3-star, and this is a position like safety and wide receiver are positions where there is an athletic difference. Like I think that in terms of projectability, that's where the rankings from an athleticism standpoint are the most obvious, are the skill positions.
Right.
Like you can see a guy who's going to probably project into being a good player simply because he's going to be more athletic than the guy across the ball from him. And that is going to be a factor with the safety, like Tate, who's a guy who moves really well. I believe he's 6'3", and he's around 200. So he's a big boy that can run and move.
That's why he's a borderline 4-star guy, right? He's 87, 88. He's right in that range. And to your point, there's not much on the board past him, right? He was like the target at safety. We talked about Tackett Curtis. Quarterback, there's nobody on the board right now. Joe Crocker is a bit in the air. It doesn't seem like he's coming here, though, if you're reading tea leaves. And then Braden Marshall, who was a cornerback, a 4-star guy that we thought initially Wisconsin was sitting really well with him, and it seems like he's trending away as well. So you had Mikhail Gardner, too, the defensive lineman, who's not going to come here. So you had this group of targets that really would have helped elevate the class. And really, if we're being honest, the only one left on the table is Tackett Curtis, realistically. And he's still a bit of a coin toss. Now, I think we all feel pretty good there, but it would shock nobody if he went to Iowa State.
This is true. To Ohio State?
Yeah.
You say Iowa State?
Oh, no. He's not going to be a Cyclone. It would shock nobody if he went to Ohio State.
Okay. All right.
But my point is, even if he came here, and you made this point, even if Tackett Curtis joined this class, this 2023 class, and he would instantly become one of the best recruiting wins in the last 10, 20 years, this would still be a pretty marginal class unless something really changes that we're not seeing.
We are going to be probably in the 40s, which is a major step in the wrong direction, especially for a class should not be a small class. Like this is a class that should be in the low 20s in terms of number of commits. So it's not the end of the world if you're in the 40s and you have a 16-player class. It's a little bit bigger of a deal if you're 20 plus and you can't get higher than that.
By the way, for anyone listening, the irony is not lost on me. I just did literally the last show I did was Paul Chryst and the positives, and his ability to raise our recruiting profile was one of my positives. So the irony is not lost on me that this year is a bit of a downer. I think there's reasons for it. We are going to get into another segment coming up that I think is really interesting. Justin wants to kind of take a second and riff on it, really about the transfer portal and why it's not really the insta fix that a lot of Badger fans think it is. But today's show, first, let's talk about LinkedIn. As the sun comes out, small businesses are coming back into business. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier than ever to grow your team, helps you find the right people that you want to interview faster, more efficiently, quicker, and better. You're going to get better results, better candidates, which means you're going to have better people doing the work for you. LinkedIn Jobs helps you reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network, over 810 million people, which is incredible. You're going to be able to add your job, and LinkedIn will help spread the word, get the right people in the door. And there's tools that will help you filter out applicants that you don't want to talk to because they're not qualified. And that's, at the end of the day, what it's all about. It's win-win. It saves you time, and it saves the candidates time. They know that they're coming in with an opportunity to get the job, which means they're going to bring their A game. Absolute win-win. Did you know every week LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want? More than 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you again for making Locked On Badgers your first listen. We're getting Justin back on the show. We definitely want to pound through this. So I wanted to turn over to you. I've seen this sentiment where college fans in particular, but probably really Badger fans, because we just came off an offseason where, Paul Chryst brought in 6 transfers, several defensive backs, and now Badger fans, I think they're starting this idea that it's almost okay if you miss on recruiting targets because we'll just get them in the transfer portal. I disagree with that. I think you do as well. I want to hear your take on this.
I majorly do. Now, first off, I'm going to go ahead and give kudos to the staff big time for this last cycle for picking up guys that they needed. They did a great job bringing in some talent, especially at the cornerback room to help take care of things for this next season. I caution people heavily if they think that this is going to be a year in, year out experiment. Number one, the first thing I want to point out here, the bulk of these guys that were transfers were grad transfers. So they're going to have an easier time getting into Wisconsin than most. Keontae Lewis was kind of the outlier there. He's a guy who was able to get in because he was coming from a very high-end academic institution in UCLA. So he's a guy that's going to have an easier time getting into Wisconsin than most traditional transfers are going to have. You have the safety target from Utah, who also, Utah is not a terrible college in terms of from academics either. The point I want to make is this. That's the type of player you're going to see more often than not. And what you're going to see when we look at this from a transfer standpoint, more often than not, you're not going to get starters. You're just not. Like, unless there's starters that are being overrun by another player who's more talented, which is telling in its own right, you're not likely to get guys who are going to be huge difference makers. Now, I think we feel really good about the guys we got this year. I think there was talent there, and I definitely think that there, especially in Shaw, is a guy who could draw some NFL looks at the end of this year. Now, I do not see that as being as common as people seem to think it is, where we're just going to be able to reload at corner every year, especially not with younger guys. And it gets really difficult to go out there and grab one-year guys every year for that position. Now, Wisconsin has an elite defense. Like, we have the advantages there of being able to go and sell and say, you're going to be showcased in a top 5 defense at cornerback if you come here. And that's not something that we can do on every position. We're going to see a lot of the same issues. And I brought up basketball to you when we were discussing this primarily, because I think that's a really good example of why the transfer portal isn't this cure-all that people think it is. Badger fans thought Johnny Davis was going to bring us in some high-end kids that were potentially, they would see him play, and that the transfer portal would help us out this last cycle for basketball. What we learned is that, yeah, Johnny Davis played really well, but there's also a lot of other schools out there that have traditionally been showcasing talent that are also looking for spots to fill and are going to grab those kids. And they're going to play in a style that fits more what they want to be in, which is they're going to be able to crank up shots and not necessarily have the risk of getting yanked if they get a little wild with it. That is something that in basketball, Wisconsin's not likely to do. Now, they've definitely loosened up and more willing to let guys play, but it's not like going to Duke or Kentucky or Carolina where you're going to be able to play through your mistakes a lot of the time. With offense for the Badgers, if you're a quarterback target and we miss in the initial, like we are kind of right now,
like this cycle where we have no quarterbacks coming in, and the answer is let's go to the transfer portal.
Yeah. We're not going to hit the transfer portal and find anything of value there. You're not going to get a above average starter who's going to be washed out. Now, it does happen from time to time that a good starter gets a 5-star target, comes into some elite school and pushes out a guy who's just been good, not great. But there's other schools out there that are far more pass happy that are going to get those guys. It's just the way it is.
We saw it. Someone will instantly point to, well, Russell Wilson came here. Sure. I mean, that was a decade ago.
Yeah.
But we saw it this offseason. Caleb Williams was available, one of the top talents in the country, a major in with Bobby Ingram, who had just been hired, right? A lot of juice there. And Wisconsin was really never a real player.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, he went to USC. Like the elite quarterbacks, when they transfer out of whatever school they're in, they're going to USC, Alabama, Florida, Notre Dame, Ohio State, etc. You pick it.
Yeah.
Right. Quinn Ewers transferred to Texas. Like, that's how those guys aren't going to transfer to Wisconsin because Wisconsin doesn't throw the ball.
And what you're looking at most likely is going to be a third-tier quarterback that may have some starting experience, but probably wasn't overly impressive in that time.
Like maybe Jack Cohn.
I would say that he's probably the top end of what you can expect.
Yeah.
If we're going to get a transfer quarterback, that's like we're running around screaming how excited we are that we got that guy. It's more likely we're going to get a MAC quarterback who probably was a guy who was like 8-5 for his time there and was something like 16 touchdowns, 9 picks in the MAC.
Well, let me tell you where I really agree with you as well. And I don't know if you really I don't know if you looked at it from this angle. People will say, well, we're not hitting on our defensive backs this cycle or our quarterbacks. So, but it's okay because we can get those dudes in the transfer portal. And we did it last year. Well, you have to go back to the beginning of why did we have to get those guys from the transfer portal? It's because our depth at those positions wasn't good enough to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Like not hitting in the recruiting cycle is what actually creates the need to have to go find those dudes. If you, where
it doesn't fix the problem because the problem is still there. You're just hoping that a year gives some of these young guys a chance to grow a little bit.
But it's not the panache. It's not the Band-Aid. Or it is a Band-Aid. Sorry. It's not the cure that everybody thinks it is.
Yes.
Like you have to hit on recruits, especially at Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that what people are missing is the spot where you don't need to do it as much is the Alabamas and the Ohio States, because those guys, once anybody goes in the transfer portal, any elite player, they're going to cherry pick those guys. Yeah. Wisconsin's not in that spot.
It's like Addison going to USC.
100%. Yep.
It's like,
for those that don't know, Pittsburgh star receiver.
Yeah, we're going to get the Blitnikoff winner. We're just going to go ahead and grab him.
We'll take him. They're like shopping, right? We'll take that one.
And that's exactly how it is because those kids these are kids that wanted those offers when they're coming out of high school. And now they've proven that they're an above average college player. And the big boys are like, yeah, we'll take you. You've
quite
proven
frankly, take that even a step further, right? I think cornerback is a separate issue because Wisconsin's defense is elite. Yes. But if you're talking receiver, quarterback specifically, why in the world would a grad transfer into this offense?
Productive, yes.
A productive one, a good one, that with the way we've played and the way we've thrown the ball for the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Go even back. This even predates Paul Chryst. Gary Anderson never had a good passing offense either. Why would, if I'm a grad quarterback, I'm not coming to Wisconsin. So that's even more reason why you have to hit on the high school recruiting class. You have to get a player in to develop them.
Yes. The reality is this. If you want Wisconsin to start getting to catch the attention of the better than average transfer guys, the passing game has to get better on its own. Like it naturally has to be. The biggest thing that could happen is this year we have a good passing game. Now, this year we have a good passing game, then you're going to have Mertz next year again.
Which is fine, because if he has a good passing game,
the problem fixed itself. You're hoping that the guys behind him, a lot like with cornerback, start to grow into the position, and Deacon Hill's ready to be a very viable backup by next year.
That being said, you still need to find a quarterback this cycle somewhere.
You have to.
You have to.
From a depth standpoint, does anybody not realize how insane it would be if Mertz were to go down? Like how dire the straits would be if Wisconsin lost Graham Mertz this year. You are looking at a 7-win ceiling team.
You're going to run the barge 37 times a game.
Yes. And that is not going to help recruiting at all.
No.
Because people are going to look at it and go, it's more of the same. They're throwing 10 times a game.
Hey, coming up, I want to talk to you. So I just did Paul Chryst positives and weaknesses, what I love about him, what I hate about him, 2 separate shows. I'm going to throw a couple at you. I'm going to see where you're at on the Paul Chryst love-o-meter. We're going to do that next. First, today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your #1 source for all of your sports betting needs and information, prop bets, future wagers, online live casino games, Vegas games, roulette, blackjack. Whatever you want is there. The website's intuitive, easy to use. BetOnline remains your #1 source for all of your sports gambling needs. And it's a great time for futures. All these leagues, the NBA draft just happened. Summer league's going on right now. NFL draft and free agency is mostly over. There's a few guys out there still, but it's a great time if you have a feel on somebody. We've talked about the Badgers over under 8.5. Justin and I are always over it because we're just homers, but it's a great spot to get into all that action if you have a good lean. Grab your mobile device today, head to the website, learn more about the trends and action. Bet online, where the game starts. Thank you again, everybody, for making Locked On Badgers one of your first listens every day. We're on with Justin. We try to get him on quite a bit, and I want to talk a little bit about Paul Chryst because I know you got opinions on both sides of this. So I recently did 2 shows, Paul Chryst, why I think Badger fans are lucky to have him, why he's really good, and some of my issues with him. I'm going to give you a couple from each ledger, and then I'm going to let you just go with it and see what you agree with, disagree with, or if there's something about him that frustrates you that I'm missing. You ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so these are my big cons with Paul Chryst. I think he's far too conservative in big games. Like, stop punting from the 37-yard line. Occasionally go for it on 4th down. Try to throw the ball before halftime. I think he gives away possessions far too often in a game, and particularly in big games.
For a team that is limited possession.
Yep, for a team that doesn't have the talent advantage against the better teams at times. I think he fails monumentally against the weaker teams, allowing the passing game to grow, throwing the ball a little bit, letting Mertz get into a rhythm. Like, you can't expect Mertz to only throw when it's 3rd down against Ohio State and expect him to perform in that situation. Mm-hmm. And lastly, I think there's a bit of a hubris thing where he thought he didn't need a quarterback coach, where he thought he could do everything. It seems like he's learned from that because there's Ingram now. There's some changes, but I think a hubris thing with the lack of his ability to bring in a dedicated quarterback guy, to bring in more of an offensive guy to help him, has hurt the program. So those are my 3 big negatives. Let me know if am I missing something? Do you agree with those? Do you disagree with one of them?
I would say I agree with most. And what I will say is I think that the perception that I have is that Paul is he's somebody who likes control. And when I say that, I think that that's a lot of why he took on as much as he did, was that he's like, I know what I want here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to take it and I'm going to run with it, because that way I know it's getting done the way I want it to be. And maybe he didn't have somebody at the time that he felt comfortable with handing it off to and saying, I trust you to handle this the way I want it handled. Which, if the things we've seen in the past with Paul is that he typically likes to lean on relationships and people that he's known in the past that he feels very comfortable with bringing in. Even in Bobby Ingram coming back, he was a guy that he had already dealt with previously when he was at Pitt. So it's a guy that he feels comfortable with, that when he tells somebody, this is what I want, that person will understand exactly what he's looking for. Now, I agree with you from him being overly conservative. And I think that the problem that I have with him is that he needs to show that he's growing and learning as he moves on, because the landscape of college football is not what it was 20 years ago. You cannot, okay, if the running game worked the way it does, still, there would be an NFL team with a running back running the ball 40 times a game and throwing the ball 10 times.
Right. Nebraska would still be running the triple option.
The 49ers have done it against the Packers before. And why did they do that? Because the Packers were effectively playing Purdue's defense in that game. So the only time you see an NFL team do that is when they completely have another team physically overmatched. Now, in college football, Wisconsin
you can do that more often.
You can. However, even now that is becoming less common. There are teams that it's going to bite you. And I'm a strong proponent of, when you play limited possessions, you are really, really reducing your margin for error. You cannot screw up, because you're just not going to separate from the other team. So you're really limiting it's risk averse, because you're avoiding the opportunity for the other team to get turnovers and things like that, because you're not making risky plays. However, you're assuming a certain amount of risk by saying, I feel confident that we will be able to sit on the ball and we can score just enough. And there's 2 different ways that college football looks at it. There are teams that go out there and say, we are going to just beat the brakes off you, and we're going to score as much as we possibly can. That's what Ohio State does. We have more talent than you. We will score until we don't need to score anymore. And we know that you're put away. Now, there's something to be said for that. It's demoralizing. Now we can say it's demoralizing to just run on a team and grind clock.
I think it is.
It is.
I do think that is.
It is to a point. You have to still score. You have to. It has to eventually lead to something in order for it to be it. Because otherwise, the other team is always going to sit there and be like, "Well, yeah, they ate 5 minutes, but we're still only behind a touchdown. So all we need is one score here to get back in this game, and we're tied. And we're back to even." And
you're talking about the patented 8-minute Wisconsin 37-yard field goal attempt drive.
It's great if it works, but if it doesn't, you're putting yourself at risk. And that's when a coach like Paul Chryst gets burned. When he looks back at it and he's like, "Oh, well, I thought we'd get the 10-minute drive, we get those points, and we'd be good." Well, yeah, but if you end up on, if you have to convert on 7 straight third downs, that gets really complicated to do. So
there's too many moments too where it feels like he can't switch from. I think there's points in the game where that 8-minute drive is apropos, like you need
it is,
and then there's points where you have a minute and a half before halftime and you're running a draw to Garrett Groshek. It's like he can't quite find the balance. So let me give you what I have for his pros though, and then I want to give you a chance to kind of wrap up your thoughts on Paul, the good, the bad, where you're actually really at on him, because I did both these shows and I'm pretty hard on him in my cons, but at the end of it, after doing both, I kind of get to the point where here's where I'm at, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. I think he's a pretty darn good coach who's so close to being great.
Oh yeah.
So here's what I had for my good ones. My 3 big things about Paul Chryst that I think are really good. Despite the fact that we kind of trashed his current recruiting class, he did have the Badgers up to 16th in the country in 21. 20 and 19 were both really good classes. Mertz was a great recruiting win. I think he's, for the most part, recruited really well. I think he runs an incredibly high floor program, which does matter. Like, there's never a bad, horrible Wisconsin team. The bad teams are still like 8-win teams.
Yeah,
I think that matters. Like, Nebraska would build a statue to get an 8-win team right now, right? They would sacrifice the corn to the corn gods. And the other thing, I think his hires are really good. He knows how to build a staff. You got to give him credit for keeping Aranda, for elevating Leonard. So I think that's where I'm really high on him. And overall, I come around to really good coach. I wish he could just like buff out a few. Honestly, I feel like dinosauric, like really conservative tendencies. But where are you at overall? Do you disagree with my positives? Is there something else I'm missing there? Really curious to get your big picture take on Chryst.
I honestly agree. My perspective on Chryst has always been he's a very high floor coach. He's a guy who's more conservative than I'd like to an extent. I would like to see a little more balance in the passing game because I think it only helps our program as a whole. I think that people get the wrong idea when they think that we can't pass more and still be a run heavy program, because I think that there is some ground to give there, and you're still a very successful running team. And I don't think that necessarily hurts anything. I think it actually makes the offense more explosive and actually probably benefits your offense as a whole. So my gripe on him would be that I wish he was a little less conservative overall offensively. I wish he was more attack prone when it comes to, as a coach. Like there are certain guys who will go for the jugular, and I'm not sure that Paul's one of those guys. And I would like to see him be more aggressive in that regard to try and put teams on their heels and put them away and stomp on their throat. And that's one of the things that I think is a big deal. And I mean, the biggest loss that I can remember in Wisconsin history that was the most frustrating ever to me was the Big Ten championship game against Penn State. We got
really?
a big...
That's your biggest loss? Really?
It was the most painful to me because of the fact that this was a game that we had every opportunity to just stomp on their throat and be done with and have it be over with. And we didn't put them away, and it cost us. And that was a prime example of a game where it's like, man, you get aggressive, you get one more here, and we're done. And instead, we just tried to grind it out,
right,
and make it work. And what happened? We let them back into the game. And that's the way you had. If you watch the games, especially for a team against Ohio State, they keep taking risks. They keep attacking, and they get Ohio State making the mistakes that they don't have to normally make because they're normally ahead. And so they're throwing the ball up for grabs. They're taking risks on pass plays that normally
you got to
wouldn't.
land some punches.
Exactly.
You
have to make them start to get a little worried about where the game is going.
That's where I hope Bobby
having
Ingram,
to get into a track meet. Yes.
Yeah, that's where I 100% agree with that. I hope to goodness gracious that's what Bobby Ingram is here to at least try to do. Let me finish on this because I'm curious on this. We haven't even really talked about it. What would it take for Paul Chryst to be on the hot seat at Wisconsin? Not like the fans are angry, but like legitimately on the hot seat.
I think it would likely take obvious downturn in the program. Like suddenly we're 6-6. And I don't think that that's a 1-year thing. I think we're 6-6 and the next season is not looking like an improvement. Kind of like what's going on at Nebraska, where it's like, oh, we could be 6-6 again this year. And now it's like, hey, this isn't what we do. We're not this program that's winning half our games and losing. And 6-6 likely means we're losing to the teams that we've been consistently beating, like Iowa and Minnesota. And we've seen some give there a little bit. But if we start consistently losing to the teams that we view as our rivals, then Wisconsin's going to start saying, hey, this isn't what we spent 30 years building.
I think it would take like 3 or 4 of those seasons for him to be legitimately on the hot seat. I think there's so much goodwill for Chryst in Wisconsin.
We've already seen some cracks in the armor. That's kind of why I look at it where it's like, if we go 6-6 2 years in a row here after having such awful offense, it would be like, what is going on here?
There would be an argument to the offense continues to be bad. Why not just make Jim Leonard the head coach?
Yeah.
The defense is great.
You allow him to make changes, and we know we're going to be autopilot on defense.
It's the interesting part is Chris McIntosh, the new athletic director. You just don't know where because Barry Alvarez.
Well,
Paul Chryst was Alvarez's guy.
No AD is ever going to say a coach is on the hot seat unless it's at train wreck proportions.
Well, I guess I'm saying though, I was going in a different way. Like I was saying, like we know Paul Chryst is Barry Alvarez's guy.
Oh yeah,
right. Well, McIntosh didn't pick Chryst, so I'm sure they have a great relationship. They're both football dudes, but there's probably not as much of a rope there anymore.
Possibly, but my way of looking at it too is that it doesn't matter what an AD says because it never means anything until he's telling you that you're no longer hired. Like they always say the company line on stuff. Like how often do we see like they now talk about it as a joke that when a guy gets a confidence boost, it typically means that he's heading out the door.
That's not a good sign.
Yeah. Chryst isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
And nor should he, in my opinion.
No, he's earned it, but are there things we'd like to see him do better? Yes.
Doggone it.
He's a very high floor coach that I feel personally, if he made a few tweaks to his philosophy, could be a guy you're looking at and saying he is a top 5 coach in college football.
I agree. No, I 100% agree. It's like it's more frustrating because I think he's so close.
I think he's capable.
Like if he was Ron Zook, right? Or if he was Tim, Bruce, or like whoever, like you could name a litany of coaches and you're like, oh, well, it doesn't really matter because this guy's a doofus. Chryst isn't that. Chryst is so close to just go for it before halftime. Like don't call a timeout on 3rd down and 4th down to know if you have to punt or not. Like for Pete's sake, these little things.
Play proactive on offense.
Yeah,
it's okay it's okay to attack the defense. It's exactly what Wisconsin does on defense, which is we're going to come for you and don't make mistake. That's exactly what they're saying to quarterbacks on the other team. They're saying we are going to bring pressure, prove that you can play beyond it. And there are very few quarterbacks in college that can play beyond the pressure. And that's the only time their defense gets beat. And on offense, I wish it was kind of the same way. Let's put the screws to you and prove to you that you're not going to break if we start putting pressure on spots where your defense has weak points.
He is Justin. Wait, over there. I am Ryan. Thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. Make it one of your first listens every day. Really do appreciate it. We continue to have Justin on quite often, as much as I really can, quite frankly. And when you're done here, go to Big Ten, Locked On Big Ten, get the latest news from everywhere across the conference. Get you up to date on Wisconsin and everything else is going on. Big news, obviously, with USC and UCLA coming in, so a lot going on there. Really appreciate everyone and hope you have a great night. We'll talk later.